I was left in the desert, not as a human being, but as a piece of cargo no one wanted anymore. My breath scratched dry in my throat, sand clung to my skin, and the rope dug into my wrists until it bled. I lay there, inside a broken wooden wagon covered with a torn canvas, nothing more than discarded freight. Above me, the sky began to burn with morning. Arizona sunrises were never gentle. They cut across the land like heated steel, painting the rocks and the sand in fire. I remember thinking I should not have survived the night. No one believed I would see another dawn. To them, I had no value. To me, there was only this ragged, stubborn pulse refusing to stop. The wood groaned when I shifted. Every smell clung to me: old blood, sweat, the hide of dead animals, and the stench of fear. I had lost count of the hours since they threw me here. The last memory I held was the laughter of men and the shove that knocked me into the wagon. One of them said, "Leave her there. Debt's paid." And that was the end of it. My world had collapsed into heat and silence. Each heartbeat was a hammer, striking at my shame. Between life and death, I didn't pray for freedom. I didn't dream of rescue. I only wondered if the desert would swallow me whole and erase me from memory. Then came footsteps. Not the heavy gallop of horses, not the sharp march of soldiers. This was slower, measured, solid, like the sound of someone who carried weight not only on his boots but in his chest. The porch groaned under him. I forced my eyes open against the brightness, bleeding through the canvas. A shadow blocked the sun. He did not hurry. He did not laugh. He did not spit the way others had. He simply stood there, watching the abandoned wagon like he couldn't decide if it was trouble or a trick. I heard his breath, low and steady, before the canvas was lifted away. Light tore into me. I blinked hard, and the first thing I saw was his face-weathered skin, dark eyes carved deep, and the silence of a man who had seen more than he ever wanted to speak of. I didn't know his name. I didn't know what he wanted. But every memory screamed the same truth. Men who found me always took what they thought was theirs. My lips cracked, my voice barely more than a rasp, and I forced the words out, the only plea left inside me. "You paid for me. Now finish it." I kept waiting for footsteps to cross the floor, for the shadow to fall over me, for the weight of hands. But none came. Instead, the firelight flickered against the far wall, and the rhythm of his movements grew distant, slow, steady like a man accustomed to silence. My eyes betrayed me, slipping closed, then snapping open again in panic. Yet the hours dragged on, and still, he did not come. Exhaustion claimed me at last. I slept like a hunted animal, jolting, twitching, expecting claws. I remember the smell of dust and leather as he carried me through the door of a small wooden house. His arms were steady, but his silence was louder than any voice. The room he set me in was plain: four walls of rough boards, a cot in the corner, a tin cup on a table. He laid me down and stepped back, as if the very air between us was a line he would not cross. My throat ached with thirst. Without a word, he set a jug of water on the table and left me with it. I watched him from the cot. Every bone in me was ready for the moment when his kindness would end, when his true intentions would crawl out. Men always revealed themselves, but he did not come closer. Not that night. Not even when I drifted in and out of fevered dreams. Instead, he worked quietly around the house. I heard the groan of the floorboards, the crack of firewood splitting, the whistle of a kettle. Each sound felt unreal to me, as though I had stumbled into a memory that did not belong to my life. When he left food by my side, I didn't eat it first. I thought it a trick, that he was waiting for me to weaken before demanding his price. But when I finally reached for the bread, no hand stopped me, no eyes lingered too long. Night fell heavy. The desert wind rattled the boards, carrying coyotes' cries with it. I curled up on the cot, every nerve screaming to stay awake, to guard myself, and still, no one touched me. When dawn pressed pale light through the cracks of the cabin walls, I woke with a start. My heart hammered, expecting the worst. My hands clawed at the blanket, but the space around me was empty. The water remained on the table, the food untouched beside it. For the first time in months, I had opened my eyes to a morning where no stranger's hand had claimed me. For the first time after so long, I woke and found no one's touch on me. On my back, They carved a word the way men carve their names into wood. I had tried to forget it, to let the wound scab over and vanish with time, but scars have a way of speaking louder than silence. They stay, like brands of ownership. The one across my shoulders was no accident. It was a sentence, written in blood, meant to strip me of everything I was. I don't know how many days I stayed on that cot, drifting between hunger and fever. He was always there, quiet, steady, moving through the house like he belonged to it as much as the creak of the floorboards. He spoke little, almost never. Sometimes he would leave food within my reach, or fresh water in the tin cup. I waited for demands, waited for the mask to fall, but it never did. One evening, when the fever burned me too hot, I felt the blanket being drawn back. For a moment I panicked, every nerve screaming, and I nearly lashed out. But then I saw his hands gentle, not grabbing, not taking, just lifting the fabric to change the bandages on my back. The air hit raw flesh, and I gasped. The word, ugly and deliberate, stretched across my skin. I knew he saw it. I braced myself for his disgust, his ridicule, the cruel laughter I had heard so many times before. But it never came. He did not speak. He only worked carefully, dabbing the wounds with water, winding clean cloth across my shoulders. His silence weighed heavy, not because it condemned me, but because it carried something else, something I hadn't felt in too long. Respect. That night, the fire crackled low, throwing shadows across the walls. I sat upright, knees pulled to my chest, staring into the flames. The scars itched under the cloth, as though they wanted to crawl back into my memory. And so I spoke. My voice was hoarse, but the words forced themselves out, like blood from a reopened cut. They called me worthless, I said. That's what they carved. Sheriff Harlan lost his hand at cards, and when he couldn't pay, he shoved me forward like a chip on the table. They tied me down, and they carved it into me, letter by letter, until I couldn't scream anymore. The room was silent except for the fire. He didn't move. He didn't speak. I stared harder into the flames. My hands trembled, though I tried to hide it. They took my body, they took my name, and when they were done, they left me behind like trash. Tell me, I whispered, my throat raw, if I am so worthless, why am I still alive? I turned then, expecting his eyes to betray the same contempt I had learned to expect. But instead, I saw something different, something that struck me harder than cruelty ever had. In the glow of the fire, his jaw tightened, his shoulders tensed, and deep within his eyes, I saw not pity, not disgust, but fire, quiet, smoldering, dangerous. When I lifted my gaze to him, I saw no scorn, only a blaze rising in his eyes. He made me no promises, yet that night, I saw him writing. The fire was low, its glow painting the walls with restless shadows. I lay on the cot, half hidden beneath the blanket, pretending to sleep, but my eyes were open, tracing the movement of his hand as it dragged a pen across rough paper. The scratch of ink filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. His shoulders bent forward, the lamplight spilling over his weathered face. There was a look in his eyes I hadn't seen before, not in him, not in any man, determination sharpened by something more dangerous than anger. The letter was long. He stopped now and again, tapping the pen against the table, as if choosing words carefully. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought it was a trick, some private game I couldn't understand. But then I noticed his hand, the fingers smudged with ink, the small furrow between his brows, and I knew this was real. I pushed myself up, inch by inch, until I could see the paper from where I lay. The words were hard to catch, but one name stood out: Captain James Hollister. A soldier's name, someone he trusted, someone far from this lonely house. I swallowed, my throat raw. He wasn't writing about himself. He was writing about me. The realization struck harder than any blow I had ever taken. For the first time, my pain, my scars, my very existence were being recorded, not as shame but as truth. He was telling someone. He was making me visible. All my life, men had spoken about me as though I were a thing to be traded. My name, my body, my worth were never mine to hold. But here on this night, under this roof, my story was being written down, carried by ink and will. I shifted, the blanket rustling. He looked up. His eyes met mine, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I thought he might hide the paper or brush it away. Instead, he set the pen down, as if to tell me without words that nothing about this was secret. My lips trembled. "Why?" I whispered. He leaned back, exhaling slow, his gaze never leaving mine. "Because your scars speak louder than silence," he murmured, almost too low for me to hear. I felt something stir inside me, a flicker so faint it frightened me. It wasn't joy. It wasn't even relief. It was the smallest ember of belief, fragile and dangerous. I lay back down, the blanket pulled to my chin. My body was still sore, still tired. But for the first time since I had been left in that wagon, I felt the weight shift. I was not invisible. My suffering had been seen, written, and believed. For the first time, I felt a spark within me hope. That sunset carried a rider, and I knew trouble was coming. The desert glowed red as the day slipped into night. Shadows stretched long across the land, and the air grew heavy with the kind of silence that warns you something is about to break. I stood at the small window, my fingers pressing into the wood, when I saw him. Dust rose behind the horse as it cut across the flats, a single figure riding hard toward the ranch. The sky burned like fire at his back, but it wasn't the beauty of the sunset that held me. It was the certainty I felt in my bones. This was no traveler. He was coming for me. Caleb stepped out onto the porch before the rider even slowed. His stance was calm, but I saw the way his hand rested near his hip, fingers loose, ready. He didn't call out. He didn't wave. He just waited, the way a man waits when he already knows what's coming. The horse skidded to a halt in a spray of dust. The rider swung down, boots hitting the dirt hard. His hat was pulled low, but I recognized the arrogance in his stride. The way his eyes swept past Caleb and slid toward the window where I hid. My stomach tightened. His voice cut through the dusk like a whip. "I'm here to collect the delivery." He didn't call me by name. He didn't even call me a woman. Just the delivery. Caleb didn't move. The porch boards creaked beneath his weight as he leaned against the post, his silence thick as stone. For a moment, I thought he might step aside, let the man push through. That was what the world had taught me to expect, that no one would ever stand in the way. But Caleb stayed where he was. The rider, Elias Boone. I knew his face now, even through the settling dust. He had been one of them, one of the men who laughed when they tied me down. My body shook, my breath coming shallow, as memory clawed at me. Boone sneered. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. Sheriff Harlan wants what's his. You've had your time. Now hand her over." I stumbled back from the window, pressing into the wall. Every nerve screamed for me to run, to vanish, to crawl into the floorboards if I could. But something rooted me there, forcing me to watch. Caleb didn't answer. He just shifted his weight, one boot scraping the wood. Boone stepped closer, impatience dripping from every word. "You think you can keep her? You think you can stand against the sheriff's word?" That was when Caleb moved. Not with a shout, not with bluster. Just a sharp step forward, his presence heavy as thunder. Boone hesitated, taken off guard. For the first time, I saw his sneer falter. I pressed a hand over my mouth, my body shaking. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred, something that felt like strength borrowed from the man standing at that porch. This time, I knew I would not face it alone. He called me Cargo, and I felt my heart break all over again. The word cut deeper than any blade. Cargo. Not a name, not a person, just something to be claimed, passed around, stripped of soul. My knees buckled as I crouched by the window, listening to the exchange on the porch. My body trembled the way it had that night when they carved my back. Elias Boone stood in the fading light, dust clinging to his boots, his grin sharp as broken glass. He believed the desert itself would bend to his command, that Caleb was just another man too afraid to defy the sheriff's will. But Caleb didn't move. His hand rested on the porch post, calm, unhurried. Silence stretched between them, thick as rope. Boone's grin faltered. "I won't ask again," Boone snapped, his voice rising. "You know who sent me. Sheriff Harlan doesn't like to wait." Caleb's reply came low, like gravel turned in the palm. "Then you can tell him she ain't his to take." And fifth, my breath caught. My body shook harder. Never had I heard anyone speak those words, not for me. Not once. Boone sneered, stepping closer. You think you're some kind of savior. You're just one man. One man doesn't stand against the sheriff. Not out here. You'll end up in the dirt like the rest who tried. The boards creaked under Caleb's boots as he shifted forward, closing the space. The air thickened, charged with something heavy and certain. Boone's hand twitched near his belt, and I pressed myself against the wall, every nerve screaming. I thought I'd see blood. I thought Caleb would draw, the night erupting into violence. But instead, he moved with a suddenness that stole the breath from me. In a single motion, Caleb stepped in, grabbed Boone by the collar, and slammed him against the porch post. Dust burst into the air. Boone cursed, fumbling for his pistol. But Caleb's other hand was already there, steel cold and hard beneath Boone's chin. Try it, Caleb growled. His voice was a storm contained in one man's chest. I couldn't breathe. My hand shook as I clutched the window frame, torn between terror and awe. No one had ever stood between me and the men who treated me like coin to be tossed. No one, until now. Boone's bravado slipped. His eyes darted, his breath quickened. For all his talk, the desert didn't bend for him tonight. Caleb pressed harder, until Boone's hands stilled at his sides. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the fire inside and the thrum of my own pulse. And in Caleb's eyes, I saw it again, that blaze. Not of cruelty, not of greed, but of fury aimed at the men who had tried to destroy me. In his gaze, I no longer saw silence, I saw thunder. The sound of steel striking steel rang out, cold as the desert night. Boone fought like a cornered animal. Caleb had dragged him into the cabin, slamming the door shut behind them, and the room filled with the sharp smell of sweat and dust. The rope Caleb grabbed lay coiled on the floor, but Boone wasn't about to go down easy. He twisted, teeth bared, and a blade flashed in his hand. My heart lurched into my throat. It was small, hidden at his boot, but deadly sharp. The firelight caught its edge, throwing a gleam across the walls. Don't, Caleb said, voice low and heavy, but Boone only snarled, swinging wide. The cabin erupted. Chairs scraped, the table rattled, and shadows leapt across the walls as the two men collided. Caleb caught Boone's wrist, twisting hard until the knife clattered against the floorboards. The sound pierced the silence, sharp as a gunshot. I flinched, pressing back into the corner, but I couldn't close my eyes. Boone struggled, wild and vicious. He slammed his shoulder into Caleb's chest, trying to break free, spitting curses with each breath. But Caleb's strength was steady, honed by years of battles I could only imagine. He moved like a man who had seen worse than this. A man who had decided long ago he would never flinch again. They crashed against the wall, the boards groaning. Boone tried to claw for the knife, but Caleb was faster. In one swift motion, Caleb shoved him face first onto the table, rope snapping tight around his wrists before Boone could draw another breath. I heard Boone's muffled scream as Caleb stuffed a rag into his mouth. The sound died, choked into silence. His chest heaved, but the fight was gone, wrung out of him like water from a cloth. The room settled. Only the fire crackled, the glow flickering against Caleb's stern face. My breath came ragged, my body trembling with the memory of knives against skin. For a heartbeat, I thought I might collapse under the weight of it all. But then I looked closer. Caleb didn't stand over Boone like a victor claiming a prize. He didn't gloat, didn't taunt. He just secured the knots with practiced hands and stepped back, his shoulders rising and falling in quiet control. And for the first time in my life, I saw a man fight not to take, but to protect. I sat frozen in the corner, unable to move, unable to believe. My whole body shook, but the tears that welled in my eyes weren't only from fear. For the first time, I saw a man fight not to own me, but to defend me. That night stretched as long as a lifetime. Boone was tied to the porch post, his wrists bound, his mouth stuffed with cloth so his curses came out only as muffled growls. The desert wind carried the smell of dry sage and cold earth, the kind of air that cut into your bones. I sat just inside the doorway, wrapped in a blanket, staring out into the darkness where he writhed. Caleb stayed awake the whole night. He sat on the porch with his rifle resting across his knees, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though waiting for more riders. His silence was heavy, but it wasn't the kind that crushed me anymore. It was a shield, wrapping around the ranch like a wall I hadn't known I needed. I kept expecting Boone to break free, to snap his bonds, to storm back inside with that knife again. My chest ached with the fear, the memory of Min's laughter, and the sting of the blade across my back. Every sound in the desert, the cry of coyotes, the rattle of loose boards made me flinch. But Caleb didn't flinch. Hour after hour, he stayed where he was, unmoving, as if daring the night itself to challenge him. The fire inside the house burned low, shadows crawling up the walls. My eyelids grew heavy, but every time I tried to close them, I remembered the wagon, the rope, the word carved into me. Sleep was dangerous. Sleep was when they came. Still, the night passed. When the first light of dawn crept across the desert, painting the sand in pale gold, I heard it, the distant thunder of hoofs. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. For one wild moment, I thought Harlan himself had sent more men, that we were already outnumbered. Caleb rose slowly, his hand tightening on the rifle. Dust rose on the horizon, a small column against the morning sky. My heart pounded, ready to flee. Then I saw the uniforms. Blue coats glinting in the new sun. Soldiers. The riders approached in formation, steady and sure, and with them, a man Caleb had written to Captain James Hollister. They reined in at the porch, their eyes falling on Boone, tied and beaten, his guilt painted all over his face. Caleb didn't say much. He simply handed over the letter, the one stained with ink from that long night by the fire. Hollister read it, his jaw tightening, and then gave the order. Boone was hauled up onto a horse, his bonds still firm. I stood in the doorway, my hands gripping the frame, my breath shaking. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. My scars were no longer a secret shame, they were proof, carried away in the body of a man who could no longer deny them. As the soldiers rode off, Boone bound and powerless, the weight I had carried for so long shifted. It wasn't gone, not yet, but it wasn't mine to bear alone anymore. As they took him away, I realized the burden was no longer mine alone to carry. I heard my own laughter, and I could hardly believe it was real. At first, it slipped out by accident, a sound so foreign I didn't recognize it as mine. For months, maybe years, I had only known the language of silent screams muffled into pillows, whimpers bitten back into the dark. But that morning, standing near the corral with the sun spilling across the land, I laughed. The horse was the reason. A stubborn bay mare, pawing at the dirt as Caleb tried to guide her into the pen. She tossed her head, bucked against the rope, and with a sudden twist, sent him stumbling sideways into the dust. His hat flew off, and he cursed under his breath in that gravel voice of his. It was small, the kind of moment no one would remember. But for me, it was everything. The sound broke out of me before I could stop it, light and shaky, but real. I slapped a hand over my mouth, startled by the strange echo in my own chest. Caleb froze, brushing dust from his shirt. His eyes lifted, and for a second he simply looked at me. I thought he might scold me or turn away. Instead, he only nodded once, slow, as if to say, "Yes, I heard it." The day moved on. I helped with small chores, fetching water, gathering kindling, setting bread on the table. None of it was asked of me, but I did it anyway. I needed to prove to myself that I could, that I wasn't just a broken thing in the corner. My hands were clumsy, my body weak, yet with every task I felt something loosening inside me, as though the desert air itself was trying to shake the chains from my spirit. That night, as I scrubbed a tin plate clean, I caught my reflection in the water. My face was thinner, my eyes still haunted, but there was something else there too. A spark, faint but alive. I remembered the girl I had been before Sheriff Harlan's game, before men carved letters into my back and left me to rot. She had laughed freely then, around the fire with her people, her hair braided with feathers, her songs rising with the smoke. That girl felt lost to me. But maybe, just maybe, she wasn't gone forever. When I set the plate aside, Caleb was sitting at the table, sipping his coffee. He didn't speak. He rarely did. But the silence between us had changed. It no longer pressed down like a coffin lid. It was open now, lightened, a space where something new could grow. I sat across from him, the fire flickering between us. The words that wanted to form on my lips were too fragile, too strange. But I held on to the truth that laughter had come back to me, even if only once. And I knew it wouldn't be the last. In that silence, I felt the truth I was changing. I spoke words I never thought I'd say. The night was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Outside, the desert stretched endless, coyotes calling from far ridges, their voices fading into the cold. Inside, it was just the two of us, Caleb at the table, his hand wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, and me, seated close to the fire, the heat brushing against my scarred back. For weeks, silence had been our companion. It was not cruel silence, not the kind that smothers, but a steady one, like the hush of the desert wind. Yet tonight, the words pressed against my chest, demanding to be freed. I watched the flames dance, licking at the logs, casting shifting light across the wooden walls. My hands twisted in my lap. I had thought long about what would happen when the soldiers left, when Boone was taken, when Harlan's shadow no longer fell across this ranch. Would I walk away? Would I search for what was left of my people, scattered and broken across these lands? The thought terrified me, not because of the distance, but because of the emptiness waiting beyond. So I spoke. My voice trembled, but the words carried their own weight. I want to stay. Caleb's head lifted slightly, though he didn't speak. His eyes found mine, steady, unreadable. I don't mean because I have nowhere else. I continued, my throat tight. I mean because this is the first place that's ever given me a choice. All my life, decisions were made for me what I was worth, where I would go, whether I lived or died. Here I can choose. And I choose to stay. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. I had never said anything so bold, so raw. Caleb didn't answer right away. He only took a long sip of his coffee, the steam curling in the air between us. Then, slowly, he nodded. Just once. It wasn't grand. It wasn't a declaration or a vow. But in that small motion, I felt the weight of something unshakable. He heard me. He understood. And in his silence, I found acceptance stronger than any words could give. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, though I didn't let them fall. I looked back to the fire, the warmth sinking deep into me, filling spaces I thought would stay hollow forever. That was the first time I felt I truly existed, room as he often did. This time, he sat closer, not too near, but close enough that I could feel the steady warmth of his presence. They say scars never leave you. They're carved into the body like words into stone, each line a reminder of something lost, something endured. I used to believe that meant I would carry mine as chains forever, that the word branded across my back would always own me, reduce me to what those men had decided I was. But I've come to understand something else. Scars do not only mark the end of pain, they mark survival. They prove that I walked through fire and came out the other side. Life on the ranch settled into rhythm after Boone was taken away. The days stretched long under the Arizona sun, filled with the ordinary work of survival. Chopping wood, hauling water, feeding horses, patching fences. Chores that most would call dull, but to me they were extraordinary. They were proof that I could choose to rise each morning and take part in life again. Caleb never once demanded I do more than I could. He never set tasks in front of me or measured my worth by what I produced. He simply went about his work, steady as stone, leaving space for me to step in where I wished. And slowly, I did. At first, it was small things. Washing dishes, sweeping the dust from the floorboards, setting food on the table before he sat down. They were gestures, ways of reminding myself that I wasn't a shadow in the corner, that I was capable of giving, not just surviving. Then one morning, I found myself humming. I didn't mean to. The sound slipped out while I brushed the mare's coat, soft and low, a tune from my childhood among the Apache fires. The rhythm of drums, the echo of voices lifted to the night sky, it lived inside me still. For so long, I thought it had been burned out of me. But there it was, rising unbidden into the morning air. Caleb heard it. He paused by the fence, a coil of rope in his hand, and looked at me. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. But the smallest shift came across his face, something like recognition, as though he knew this moment mattered more than 100 words could explain. That was when I began to believe I could heal. Healing, I learned, is not a straight path. It doesn't move forward without falter. Some nights, I woke drenched in sweat, the word on my back burning as if it had been carved anew. Some mornings, I couldn't look Caleb in the eye, certain he must see me as broken. But he never pressed, never demanded explanations. His quiet was not the silence of neglect. It was the silence of patience. And in that patience, I began to mend. I remember one evening in particular. The sky was painted purple and gold, the air cool with the promise of night. I sat by the fire, the flames flickering against the logs, when Caleb joined me. He didn't sit across the flames flickering against the logs. We sat there for a long time without words. The fire cracked, coyotes cried in the distance, and my own heartbeat slowed to match the rhythm of the desert night. Finally, I turned to him and said, "Do you ever think about the war?" He didn't answer at first. His gaze stayed fixed on the fire, the light tracing the lines of his face. When he did speak, his voice was low, rough. "Every day. Does it haunt you?" I asked. He nodded once. "Some things don't fade. You just learn to carry them." I lowered my eyes to the flames. "That's what I fear, that I'll never be free, that I'll carry this word on my back forever." Caleb set down his cup, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. His voice, when it came, was steady as stone. "You will carry it, but it won't own you. There's a difference." I held on to those words. For days, for weeks, they became a mantra when the nightmares clawed at me. It won't own you. Little by little, I began to believe. Months passed, each one carving new layers of life onto the ranch. I learned to ride again, though my hands trembled at first when the reins cut into my palms. I learned to laugh more freely, sometimes at Caleb's muttered curses when the horses refused to listen, sometimes at myself when I stumbled clumsily over simple chores. Each laugh was a victory. I also learned to be still without fear. There were evenings when I would sit on the porch, watching the desert darken into shadow, and no dread crept into my chest. Instead, I felt peace, the kind that comes not from forgetting the past, but from knowing it cannot reach you here. And in those moments, I began to dream again. Not dreams of revenge, though I would not deny the fire that still burned when I thought of Harlan. Not dreams of riches or escape, but dreams of ordinary things, of planting a small garden, of braiding my hair with feathers again, of singing songs by the fire without shame. One night, when the stars spilled bright across the black sky, I found the courage to tell Caleb what was in my heart. "This place," I whispered. "It is the first place that has ever given me a choice, and I choose to stay." He looked at me then, really looked, and though he said nothing, the nod he gave was worth more than 100 promises. It was steady, sure, and it told me I belonged. The days since have been quiet. There are no more riders bringing threats, no more boots on the porch that make my blood run cold. The world beyond still turns cruel and greedy, but here, on this patch of desert land, there is peace. I still bear the word carved into my skin. Some mornings, when I catch my reflection, I see the scar and feel its weight. But it no longer defines me. It is not my name. It is not my worth. It is proof of what I survived. And in that proof, I find strength. So if you ask me what the West truly was, what it meant beyond the guns and the land and the greed, I would say this: the West was people, broken, scarred, and stubborn. People who chose, in the face of cruelty, to be kind. People who believed that even in the harshest desert, something new could grow. I am not who they said I was. I am not worthless. I am alive. I am here. And that is enough. In the quiet after the storm, what remains is not the violence or the scars, but the choice that followed them. Ahyoka's story reminds us that survival alone is not the end. It is what a person does with their survival that shapes the years ahead. She was branded as worthless, yet she learned to live in a place where her worth was no longer judged by cruelty but discovered through kindness, patience, and the slow work of healing. Caleb's silence was not absence, but presence, proof that sometimes strength is found not in the loudness of words or the swiftness of guns, but in the steady decision to stand firm beside someone when no one else will. For many listening tonight, the West may feel far away, a world of dust and wagon trails. But the truth of this tale is not bound to a time or a place. Each of us carries scars, whether they are visible or not. Each of us knows the weight of moments when the world seemed intent on telling us we were less than we are. And yet, like Ahyoka, we also know the possibility of finding peace, sometimes not in thunder or in triumph, but in the simple rhythm of daily life, in laughter that returns unexpectedly, or in a quiet nod that says, "You belong here." So let this story sit with you. Think of the people in your life who once carried you through a long night, or perhaps the ones still waiting for you to stand quietly at their side. Healing is rarely loud, but it is always shared. If this story touched your heart, consider carrying its warmth forward to someone who may need reminding that scars are not the end of their story. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, ones that honor both the pain and the resilience of the human spirit, you can support this space with a like, a share, or a subscription. Because in the end, what lingers is not the cruelty of the world, but the gentle truth we leave behind. Scars may mark us, but they do not define us.